I set my coffee down on the porch railing and watched the morning fog lift off Norris Lake. The water was flat and silver, the kind of quiet I used to dream about during the years I had nothing but work and grief and the slow grind of building something from rubble. The house behind me, 3 stories of Tennessee fieldstone and white oak, was mine. Every beam, every window, every acre of shoreline. Mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. I was 64 years old. I had $22 million in commercial real estate across 4 states, a company that ran without me needing to be in the room, and more peace than I ever thought a man like me deserved. I had earned all of it the hard way after losing everything else that mattered. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I am not a man who enjoys conflict. I spent 40 years swinging hammers, pouring foundations, negotiating contracts. I built things. I fixed things. When something broke, I found the cleanest, most efficient way to set it right. That is who I am. That is who I have always been. Which is why what my daughter-in-law did to my family, what she convinced my son to go along with cut so deep for so long. Because I kept thinking there had to be a way to fix it. I kept thinking the right words, the right moment, the right gesture would turn things around. 12 years later, I finally understood that some things are not broken. Some things are rotten all the way through. And the only thing to do with rot is cut it out before it spreads. My son Marcus was 31 when he married Renee Calloway. She was sharp, pretty in a calculated way. And she had a talent I did not recognize at the time. A talent for reading people and finding the exact pressure point that would make them bend. With me, she found it quickly. I was a widower. My wife Carol had passed 4 years before the wedding, and I was still carrying that weight everywhere I went. Renee sensed the loneliness the way a dog senses fear, and she used it with precision. The first year, she was polite. The second year, she started making small comments. Little observations about how I visited too often, how I had strong opinions about how they should run their household, how Marcus still checked with me before making decisions like he was afraid of his own father. None of it was entirely untrue, but none of it was entirely fair either. And the way she said things quietly, reasonably, always with a concerned tilt of her head, made it impossible to argue without sounding like exactly what she was describing. By the 3rd year, Marcus had changed. He stopped calling on Sundays. He forgot my birthday, for the first time in his life. When I came over for Thanksgiving, the conversation felt like a job interview, careful, distant, like we were 2 strangers trying to be polite. Their daughter Emma was 4 years old that Thanksgiving. She climbed into my lap after dinner and fell asleep while I watched football, and I sat there not moving for 2 hours because I did not want to wake her. She was the best thing in that room. 6 months later, Marcus sat down across from me at my kitchen table and told me, in a flat, rehearsed voice, that Renee felt I was a toxic presence in their lives, that my controlling behavior was damaging their marriage, that they needed space, real space, and they were asking me not to contact them anymore. Not for a while, he said. Just until things settled down. I asked him to tell me specifically what I had done. He looked at the table. He said it was a pattern, not one thing. I asked him if this was what he believed, or what Renee believed. He said it was both. He walked out of my kitchen, and I did not hear from him again for 12 years. I tried. Lord knows I tried. I sent letters the first year, real letters, handwritten, careful not to sound angry or desperate even though I was both. No response. I called on Christmas. Marcus picked up once, in year 2, and Renee's voice came through clearly in the background, saying his name in that particular tone she had, and he told me he had to go and hung up. After that, the number was disconnected. I hired a lawyer in year 3 to establish a trust fund for Emma. I put $200,000 in it and set it up so she could access it when she turned 18 for education or housing. I sent the paperwork to Marcus's address. No acknowledgement. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that they had moved to Phoenix, then to Denver. Then to Scottsdale. Renee's family had money, and it seemed like they moved toward it and away from anything that reminded Marcus he had a father who loved him. I stopped trying around year 5. Not because I stopped caring. I stopped because the trying was killing me. And I had decided quietly, firmly, the way I made every important decision, that I was not going to die for people who had chosen not to know me. So I worked. I had the construction company, already a mid-sized operation in Knoxville, that did commercial builds and renovations. After Marcus left, I poured everything into it. I was at the site by 5 every morning, and in the office until 8 every night. I started taking on projects I would have passed on before, riskier, larger, the kind of jobs that could break a company or make it. I made smart bets, and I made them consistently. By year 7, I had a portfolio of 12 commercial properties across Tennessee, Georgia, and the Carolinas. By year 10, I had 28. I sold the construction company itself in year 11 for just under $9 million and used every dollar to buy more real estate. I bought the lake house in April. It was the first thing I had ever bought for no reason except that I wanted it. Not for investment, not for appreciation, not for tax strategy. I wanted to sit on that porch and drink my coffee and watch the water and not feel like I owed anything to anyone. That is where I was, on a Thursday morning in June, when a white SUV with Arizona plates came down my driveway. I watched it come. I did not move from the porch railing. I recognized the vehicle, a late-model Escalade, the kind Renee had always favored before I recognized the people who got out of it. Marcus had put on weight. His hair had thinned. He was wearing an expensive shirt that looked like it had been slept in. And he held himself differently than I remembered, shoulders forward, eyes down. The posture of a man who had been losing for a while. Renee got out of the passenger side. She had not changed much. Thinner, maybe. Harder around the jaw. She was already looking at the house the way she looked at everything, calculating its value. And then, Emma got out of the back seat. She was 16 now, tall, with Carol's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. And she looked around at the lake and the trees with an expression that was completely different from her parents' open, unguarded, like she was actually seeing the place instead of appraising it. She looked up at the porch and saw me, and something moved across her face that I could not quite read. Marcus walked up the porch steps first. He had a speech prepared. I could tell by the way he cleared his throat, the way his eyes went to the middle distance. He said it had been too long. He said things had been hard. He said Renee, and he had gone through a rough stretch, financially some bad investments, some legal complications he didn't go into, and they thought it might be good for everyone, for the family, to come together again, to be close again. Renee stood at the base of the steps. She did not climb them. She was looking past me at the house. I said, calmly, that I was surprised to see them. Marcus said he knew this was unexpected. He said he hoped I could find it in my heart. Renee said, still looking at the house, that it was a beautiful property. She said something like, this must have a lot of extra space. She said they had driven all the way from Scottsdale, and Emma had been asking about me. It was the first time she acknowledged Emma's existence in the conversation. And Emma, standing 20 feet away, looking at the lake, gave no indication she had heard her name. I said I appreciated them making the trip. Then Renee turned and looked at me directly for the first time, and she said they were thinking they might stay for a while. Help out. Get back on their feet. She said a place like this could certainly accommodate a family. I looked at Marcus. He was looking at the boards of my porch. I said I needed to make a phone call, and I went inside. I called my lawyer first. Her name is Patricia, and she has worked with me for 15 years, and she does not waste time. I told her who was in my driveway and what they had said. She told me to document everything, and not to make any verbal agreements. I told her I had no intention of making any agreements at all. Then I called my friend Dale, who I have known since we were 22 and pouring our first foundation together in East Knoxville. Dale knows people. He knows the kind of people who can find things out quietly and quickly. I told him Renee's full name and the mention of legal complications in Phoenix and Scottsdale. Dale said he would make some calls. I went back out to the porch. Marcus and Renee had made themselves comfortable. She was sitting in my chair, the good one that faces the water. And Marcus was standing at the railing with his hands in his pockets. Emma was sitting on the dock steps, pulling her knees to her chest, watching the lake. I offered them water. I asked about the drive. I said almost nothing of substance. I have learned, over many years of negotiations, that silence is the most powerful thing you can offer someone who needs something from you. Silence makes them fill the space, and what they fill it with tells you everything. Over the next 2 hours, between careful pleasantries and half-finished sentences, I learned the following. The bad investments were a real estate venture in Phoenix that had collapsed, a development Renee had convinced Marcus to pour their savings into, based on advice from her brother, who was currently under federal investigation for wire fraud. The legal complications were 2 civil suits pending, one from a contractor they had not paid, and one from a former business partner of Marcus's, who claimed Renee had forged his signature on a document transferring partnership assets to a private LLC she controlled. They had sold their house in Scottsdale 18 months ago. They had been living in Renee's mother's guest room. None of this Marcus told me directly. It came in pieces from his deflections, from Renee's omissions, from the things that were clearly too painful for either of them to say out loud. Marcus was not a criminal. He was a weak man who had married a criminal and spent 12 years telling himself she was just ambitious. That evening, I grilled steaks on the back patio. I opened a bottle of wine I had been saving. I let them think the visit was going well. Renee talked about the property's potential casually, like she was thinking out loud, about how a place this size could function as a family compound, how it made so much more sense for extended family to pool resources in uncertain times. She never once asked how I was. She never once said she was sorry. Emma barely spoke at dinner, but she helped me carry dishes without being asked. And when she thought no one was looking, she watched her mother the way a person watches something they have stopped trusting. After dinner, when Marcus and Renee had gone inside, Emma sat with me on the dock. The lake was dark and still. Fireflies were starting up in the tree line. She said, without preamble, that she was sorry for how things had been. I said she had nothing to be sorry for. She said she had tried to find me on her own, about a year ago. She said she knew my name, and she had searched online and found the company, but she hadn't known how to reach me without her mother finding out, and she had been scared of what would happen if Renee found out she had been looking. I asked her why she was scared. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that about 8 months ago she had found some papers in her mother's office. She hadn't understood all of it, but she understood enough. There was paperwork, with her name on it. There was a trust fund. She didn't know what a trust fund was exactly, but she knew it was supposed to be hers, and there were documents that looked like the money had been moved, transferred somewhere else. She had taken photos of the papers on her phone before her mother noticed she had been in the room. I kept my face completely still. I said, very calmly, that she had done the right thing by telling me. I said I was going to take care of it. I asked if she still had the photos. She pulled out her phone and showed me. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my reading glasses and looked at the photos Emma had taken. And what I saw made my hands go cold. The trust I had established for Emma in year 3, the $200,000 I had deposited and never received confirmation of, had been accessed. Twice. First a partial withdrawal in year 4, then a full liquidation in year 7. The authorization signatures on the withdrawal documents were mine. I had signed no such documents. I had never been contacted by the trust administrator. I had assumed the paperwork had simply been ignored. It had not been ignored. Someone had forged my signature, accessed the trust, and emptied it. I called Patricia at 7 in the morning. I sent her the photos. She called me back in 40 minutes and told me to get Emma's phone to her directly. The original photos, metadata intact, and not to say a word to Marcus or Renee. She said what she was looking at was potential federal bank fraud, forgery, and theft from a minor's designated trust account. She said she had a colleague in white-collar criminal defense who she was going to loop in immediately. and another contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit who she had worked with before. She said, "Do you want to handle this quietly, or do you want to handle it properly?" I said I wanted to handle it properly. I went downstairs and made breakfast for my house full of guests. I made eggs and toast and fresh coffee, and I was pleasant and unhurried. And when Emma came down, I caught her eye for just a moment and gave the smallest nod I could manage, and I watched something in her shoulders relax. Renee came down last, in a silk robe, looking at her phone, and she sat down at my kitchen table like she had been sitting there every morning for years, and she said the guest bedroom was a bit small for the two of them, and asked if the master suite at the end of the hall was being used. I said I used it. She said that was a shame. Such a lovely room. I poured her coffee and said nothing. Over the next 4 days, I let them settle. I watched Marcus wander the property looking lost and tired. I watched Renee move through the house like she was taking inventory. And I watched Emma, who spent most of her time on the dock or walking the tree line, and I thought about the 12 years she had grown up in the same house as that woman, and I felt something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived somewhere between them. On the 5th day, Patricia called me and said her colleague and the FBI contact were ready to move. The documentation was strong. There was a warrant being processed. She asked me if I wanted advance notice of when it would happen. I said I would like 1 hour. She said she would do what she could. The call came on a Saturday morning, while Marcus and Renee were having coffee on my porch. Emma was at the dock. I had told her the night before, quietly, while we were washing dishes, that things were going to happen today, and she should stay where she was and not be frightened. She had looked at me for a long moment and said okay with the steadiness of someone twice her age. I walked out to the porch with my own coffee and sat down across from them. The lake was beautiful. A pair of herons were working the shallows near the far bank. I said, "I want to tell you both something before we go any further." Marcus looked up from his phone. I said, "When you left 12 years ago, I spent a long time trying to figure out what I had done wrong. I went over every conversation, every visit, every phone call. I tried to find the thing I had said or done that had justified cutting me out of your lives the way you did. And I never found it. Because it wasn't there. There was nothing I did. I was a present, loving father who became inconvenient. And that was all." Marcus's jaw tightened. He started to say something. I said, "I'm not finished." Renee set down her coffee cup. Her face was very still. I said, "In year 3, I set up a trust fund for Emma. $200,000 for her education and housing when she turned 18. I sent the paperwork to your last known address. I never heard back. I assumed you had ignored it." A small muscle moved in Renee's cheek. I said, "I found out this week that the trust was not ignored. It was accessed twice using documents with my forged signature. The trust was completely liquidated by year 7. $200,000 that belonged to your daughter. Gone." Marcus turned and looked at Renee. It was the look of a man watching a wall he built himself come down. Renee said, and her voice was remarkably controlled, that she didn't know what I was talking about. I said, "You will have an opportunity to explain that to the FBI." The black SUV came down my driveway 3 minutes later. 2 agents and a county sheriff's deputy. Renee stood up when she saw them, and for one moment the mask came completely off. Not fear, exactly, but fury. The cold fury of someone who has never once considered they might actually lose. She looked at me and started to say something. I said, "You're on my property. I'd like you to leave with them quietly." She was not quiet, but she left. Marcus sat on my porch for a long time after the vehicles were gone. He did not speak. I sat with him because he was still my son, even if I was not sure, in that moment, what that meant or what it would mean going forward. The herons were still in the shallows. The lake did not care about any of us. After a while, he said, "I didn't know about the trust." I said, I believed him. He said, "I didn't know about a lot of things." I said, "I know." He put his face in his hands and I sat with him while he fell apart. And I did not try to fix it or hurry it along. Some things you have to let come all the way down before you can think about what to build in the place they occupied. Eventually, I told him there was a hotel in Jacksboro, about 20 minutes up the road. I said I would pay for 2 weeks. I said after that we would see. I said I was not ready to have him in my house, not yet, but I was not ready to write him off either. And I needed him to understand the difference. He nodded. He could not look at me directly. I mouthed. I mun off. He drove away in the white Escalade, alone, and I watched until the trees took him. Emma was still on the dock. I walked down and sat beside her. She said, "Is she in jail?" I said she was in custody and that Patricia would keep me informed. She said, "What happens to me?" I told her that she was 16, that her father was 20 minutes up the road, and that nothing was going to happen to her that she did not have a say in. I told her that if she wanted to stay at the lake house while things got sorted, she was welcome. I told her she did not have to decide anything right now. She looked out at the water for a long time. Then she said, "I want to finish high school here, in Tennessee." I looked it up. There's a good school in Jacksboro, and there's a community college in La Follette that has dual enrollment for juniors and seniors. I could start getting college credits while I finish high school. I looked at her. She said, "I want to study architecture. I've wanted to for a long time. I didn't tell anyone because Renee said it wasn't practical. But I looked at your properties online. I found them in a news article, and the way you talked about the buildings in the interview, I thought maybe you would understand." I said, "Your grandmother Carol always said the two most important things a person could build were a house and a life." She meant it literally, and she meant it the other way too. Emma said, "Tell me about her." So I did. We sat on the dock until the sun moved behind the tree line, and the fireflies came back. And I told her about Carol, how she laughed, how she argued, how she could look at a plot of bare ground and see a home standing on it before the first stake went in. And Emma listened the way young people listen when they are storing something away, carefully, to keep. Patricia called me 3 weeks later with the full picture. Renee had been charged with federal bank fraud, forgery of financial documents, and theft from a trust account designated for a minor. The forgery case tied back to the Phoenix development, as well the same techniques, the same signatures, a pattern that her colleagues said prosecutors had been hoping to connect for 2 years. The partner who had sued in Scottsdale had immediately moved to cooperate with federal investigators. The charges were significant. She was not getting out of this. Not cleanly. The $200,000 from Emma's trust could not be fully recovered. Renee had spent it, commingled it with other funds, made it difficult to trace completely. But the civil suit Patricia filed on Emma's behalf against the trust administrator who had failed to verify the withdrawal authorizations settled for $310,000, held in a new account that I personally established at a different institution, with controls I designed myself, and my name on nothing except as the funding source. Emma started school at Jacksboro High in September. She took dual enrollment coursework in drafting and structural design at the community college on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Her teacher sent me an email, unprompted, in October, the kind of email teachers rarely take the time to write, saying that Emma had a genuine gift and asking whether she had considered applying to architecture programs. I printed that email and put it on my refrigerator. Marcus was in Jacksboro. We had dinner most Sundays, not at my house yet, at a diner in town, neutral ground. It was not easy, and it was not warm, and it was not what I had spent 12 years wishing it would be. But it was honest, and at 64 I have learned that honest is worth more than warm and harder to find. He was working with a therapist. His idea, not mine. He had gotten a job at a building supply company in Jellicoe. He was paying his own rent for the first time in years. On the Sunday before Thanksgiving, he said he was sorry in a way that was not rehearsed and not self-serving. Just the plain, simple thing. And I said I heard him, and we ordered pie. I am not going to tell you I forgave everything, and the family was whole again, and we all sat around the table at Christmas and wept happy tears. That is not how it went. That is not how things go. What I can tell you is that I was sitting on my porch on a Tuesday morning in late November, watching the first frost on the water, and Emma came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat down beside me. And she said she had submitted her first application to the University of Tennessee's architecture program, Early Decision. And she wanted me to read the personal essay before she sent the final version. She handed me her laptop. I put on my reading glasses. The essay was about foundations, about how her grandfather had spent his life building things for other people, and how she had grown up not knowing him, and how, when she finally met him, she understood for the first time that a foundation was not just the thing that held a building up. It was the thing you built first. Before anything else, when you were not yet sure what would stand on top of it. She wrote about architecture, and she wrote about family, and she wrote about the difference between a house and a home. She wrote clearly and without sentimentality. And she was better at it than I expected. And the last line of the essay said, "I want to build things that last, because I come from a man who taught me that what lasts is worth waiting for, even when the wait is very long." I took off my glasses. I looked at the lake. I said, "Don't change a word." She smiled Carol's smile, the same one. The one I had spent 12 years thinking I would never see again, and she took the laptop back and hit submit, and we sat there together in the cold morning air, while the frost melted and the water came back to itself, flat and silver, and full of light. I sold the construction company so I could rest, but watching Emma grow into herself, watching her build her future, the way Carol always said a person should deliberately, brick by brick, with both hands and her whole attention, I thought maybe rest was not quite the right word for what I had been looking for. Maybe what I had been looking for was this: the right people beside me, on the right porch, at the right time. Everything else was just preparation. I picked up my coffee. The herons were back in the shallows. I had built enough. It was time to watch something else rise.